Hello, friend. Thank you for joining me for episode 2 of the Fauchi Deception. Today, we're going to be looking into the science behind the reality you saw depicted in film and how they're going to do it. So, grab a cup of coffee, maybe some popcorn, pad of paper to take notes, and understand that some of these scientists have been working for DARPA and our Central Intelligence Agency, to include the Department of Defense and who knows what other 3-letter agencies, but just listen, hear for yourself.
March 16th, 2018. The U.S. government's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, commonly known as DARPA, announces a bold initiative to develop what they call next-generation non-surgical neurotechnology. It is designed to allow the human brain to directly interface with machines.
We know that DARPA is exploring human-machine interfaces that include direct connections between the brain and outside systems. That's been from the beginning of DARPA's information technology mission, and it continues to this day. DARPA has created some of the most influential technologies of all time, things that we use and take for granted every day, including the project that became the internet. They've created self-driving cars, stealth technology, GPS that fits in your pocket. That's DARPA's specialty, to imagine the future and create it.
A new technology that is actually very much on the verge of being a reality that is being fielded is we could have a sensor maybe on the surface of our head, or maybe implanted somewhere in our body, in our brain, or something that allows us to interact directly with our communications gear, our processing gear, our weapon systems, and so on. But now imagine we take that technology and we can control robots at a distance with it. Even fly drones. You put this sensor on and you think the right way, and you can increase the speed of the fan by thinking and controlling that thought with direct-to-mind or mind-machine interfacing. With that type of capability, you could control all sorts of buttons and mechanisms in equipment.
Mind-machine interfaces will have many applications in both civilian and military life. But there are those who believe that this same technology could also be used by DARPA as a new form of mind control. Like their counterparts at the CIA, DARPA-funded researchers have spent decades investigating how the human mind can be altered. In 1965, DARPA launched Project Pandora, which studied the possibility of using microwave radiation to control human behavior. The project reportedly ended in 1969, but DARPA's investigation of how machines can affect and possibly control the brain continues to this day.
There are explicit programs of DARPA to read and write to human brains, whether it's through direct implants within the brain or wearing some kind of cap. So these things are being worked on, and we know that.
So what's the next step? Maybe the next step is we can send instructions and information to an actual person from a distance with this kind of technology to let another person control their actions. But that could be something that could be malicious.
If there's some way to do it from a distance, a much greater distance than something that you can wear on your scalp, that would be the ultimate technological achievement that would fall into this realm of mind control and direct human-machine interface that DARPA may well want to keep secret.
In the near future, DARPA may possess the technology to remotely control the human mind. But as concerning as that may be, according to some scientists, a more permanent kind of mind control technology is looming. And it involves modifying the human brain by altering the human body's DNA.
The future of mind control, and the future being right now because these experiments are being done, is using gene editing tools. And one of them would be CRISPR.
It changes you if you take a genetic editing. It's you who are changed.
The way it works is take the CRISPR, which are these short alternating repeats of DNA. You put that together with an enzyme called Cas. And so you take the CRISPR that you want to use, and you put these pieces together that can be injected and insert this DNA to certain areas of the brain so that we can change brain cells and turn you into something you wouldn't otherwise be. So in this way, gene editing technologies like CRISPR really form a definite basis for future mind control.
These are things that DARPA has investigated. Every technology has the potential for good or evil, and who defines what's good and what's evil, and who uses it for what purpose. These are all questions that have been asked about everything from rockets to self-driving vehicles. We still don't have a good handle on the ethics of various technologies that we use. The technologists tend not to be so concerned with the ethics. That seems to be the domain of other people, policymakers, for example, academics, people like this. There needs to be a hand-in-hand interaction with people creating technology and those who are considering the ethics of that technology.
In 2012, DARPA, which is the research division of the military, started a program. It's called the Adept Protect P3 program, Pandemic Prevention Platform. Look what they proposed. They said, listen, we are going to use gene-encoded vaccines as a new category of preventive measures based on RNA or DNA, and in this approach, we will stop a pandemic within 60 days. Within 60 days, in 2012, this was started. When President Trump came out and said it's Operation Warp Speed and they're going to develop vaccines, it would have been nice if he was prepped, or Anthony Fauci was prepped, to say, listen, we're working on this. We've been working on this since 2012. This is not new. This isn't warp speed. This is 10 years in coming. The deception out in the open that this was rapidly developed, that there was all this stunning innovation. The contractors, Moderna got its first multi-million dollar contract in 2013. The military works on programs, both the threat, SARS-CoV-2, and work on the answer, monoclonal antibodies and vaccines. But the military has biological threat programs. There's one for smallpox, monkeypox, there's one for anthrax, and who knows how many more programs. This was part of a program. But the military came up with the idea of messenger RNA vaccines, not Pfizer or Moderna, not Operation Warp Speed. It wasn't in response to what was, came out of Wuhan, China. This is a military program. When it was announced by Health and Human Services, Alex Azar, and the Department of Defense, that's who entered into this, ushered us into the vaccine era. The military. Emergency use authorization is a mechanism to get rapid new technology into the military. It's not a mechanism for the public. Its first application broadly to the public was with the COVID-19 pandemic.
So, friend, I hope that you are gathering that this is a military op, a live military op that began under the Bush administration, that the Obama administration made more robust. Obama made more robust and expanded. There has been a weaponization of the media against the people, of our government against the people, of our legal system against the people, and even our military against the people. Friend, wake up. The beast empire that is spoken of in the book Revelation is rising around us. Check this out.
Something that's largely flown under the radar, a patent filed by the U.S. government for a new product containing luciferase. That's a bioluminescent material often used in COVID-19 research. There are now reportedly proposals to use this product to start tracking people's vaccination status with an injectable that would sit under the skin. Now, you've been digging into this issue. Can you tell us what you've learned so far?
Well, I think people get hung up on the freaky name of it because it, of course, it sounds like they're talking about Lucifer from the Bible being like the devil. And, naturally people are concerned about, among the religious community, they talk about the mark of the beast and things like that. And, they're legitimately worried about that. And, of course, the media has a field day trying to debunk it and so on. The reality is this. Luciferase, regardless of how you interpret it, right, just on the surface, it's a bioluminescent material contained in like lightning bugs and so on. And one of the reasons they want to use it for these marks they want to give people, and the Department of Homeland Security has filed a patent for it, and there's ongoing research on it. It's a lot of reporting on this. They have filed a patent for it, and they want to give people marks. And the reason they want to use luciferase is because it's bioluminescent and shows up under UV light. And so they can scan you almost like a barcode. They can scan this mark they give you, and it can bring up, for example, almost just like a QR code, again, like scan with your smartphone. It can bring up data on your vaccination status or any other data they want to include on you. And to me, that is what was concerning. Not so much, well, I think it's creepy, the name of it, of course, especially as related to they want to mark you with it. But to me, the bigger thing, well, arguably the bigger thing, at least the one on the surface, is that they want to do this in the first place. That they want to give people tattoos, essentially, using this bioluminescent material so they can tell whether or not you're listening to the government. That concerns me very deeply. They've already developed it. The issue is whether they will ever actually roll it out, and that's where we're at right now.
As an auditor, we're at a light test booth, and so we inspect our products on black and white backgrounds to look for particle matter. And I notice on the white background under the light, it's almost totally translucent with a very light hint of yellow, almost non-existent. But when it goes over to the black or it's on the metal table, it's glowing a blue glow that's pretty obvious.
So it's the contrast to the black. It's suddenly you can see that this is glowing.
Glowing.
Okay, so take me back to chemistry, a chemistry class that I wasn't paying attention to in high school. What kind of a chemical could glow? Because have you ever seen a chemical before that's come through Pfizer that's glowed before?
This is a one-of-a-kind product. It raised a lot of eyebrows when employees started seeing it. Because even employees who have been there 40 years or so have never, this is a totally different ballgame of product.
They've never seen a product glow.
Not like that, and the processes are just totally out of whack. They're different than anything we've done. And
so what kind of a product could glow? What kind of a chemical could glow? What could make the product glow?
Just from my, research and stuff, I've found that luciferase and graphene oxide can emit glowing.
First and foremost, what inspired you to speak out? You were working at Pfizer. What inspired you to say, you know what, I need to do something?
Well, I'd been sitting on some information for a while, and I wasn't really sure what to do with it. I'd reached out to Project Veritas once and some other news sources and never got an answer. And then I watched Jodi's whistleblow, and she said that, she doesn't fear men, she fears God. And I thought, well, I believe that, so why aren't I doing anything? And reached out to Project Veritas again, and they got back to me, and I just knew it was the right thing to do. God put it on my heart to do this, so.
When I was in college, I read a book called How Do You Kill 11 Million People? It was written by author Andy Andrews. The deeper I dig into this, the more I realize that we've had regimes and not presidents. And they've passed deception after deception after deception onto us. They've been lying to us since the beginning. Check this out.
Well, to our top story now, a bombshell new report shows that the Department of Defense, yes, the Pentagon, controlled the COVID-19 program from the very beginning, and everything we were told was political theater, basically to cover it up, right down to the FDA vaccine approval process. It was all theater. That means that human beings were used as props, essentially. According to newly obtained documents, the Pentagon used a combination of shady approval authorizations that are still in use, including the PrEP Act, the Emergency Use Authorization, and other transaction authority, the OTA, all of which shielded big pharma agencies, medical participants that delivered unregulated vaccines from any liability and protected them, basically. We've gone through a lot of these documents and just showed how they are not on the hook for any of this liability. These documents, these new documents, were obtained by a former executive of a pharmaceutical contract research organization. That person is Sasha Lydapova, and Sasha joins us now to tell us what she's uncovered. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Sasha.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. This is intense. I mean, when you first uncovered these documents, did your jaw just hit the floor, or did you know that this is what you were going to find based on the breadcrumbs you were already uncovering?
Well, I was really shocked. I was working on this for quite some time. My first finding was that these products were not good manufacturing practice compliant. And that I found right away when they started being rolled out due to extreme variability of adverse events and deaths that were reported per each lot of the so-called vaccine. So that was very shocking to me as a pharmaceutical professional, because we know how high quality pharmaceuticals typically must be manufactured. You know, they have to be very, very consistent. There should be practically no variation lot to lot in terms of toxicities or any other performance characteristics. And these products were varying about 1,000 times lot to lot. So that was extremely concerning. And I didn't realize why that was happening, but I just knew that they were not good manufacturing practice compliant. I later confirmed that through regulatory documents. And then the final piece of the puzzle was when I was able to see all these contracts from the DoD. They were released based on Freedom of Information requests and also Securities and Exchange Commission disclosures. And when I saw those contracts, there were around 400 that are now available for all so-called COVID countermeasures, including vaccines. I realized that was really what was going on. The Department of Defense used very shady contracting practices and also used several laws that were put in place previous to COVID to do this, to shield pharmaceutical companies, to not conduct proper clinical trials, to do a lot of fraudulent, I would say, manipulations of public perception, and all in collusion, obviously, with mainstream media and these pharma companies. And so as a result, we have this theatrical performance called clinical trials, but they were actually not real. They did not, based on the laws that are used here and invoked in this process, clinical trials are not required at all. And in fact, they cannot be conducted.
I mean, that's there's many really troubling parts of the story. We'll unpack a few of them, but that one stands out to me perhaps at the top of the list, is the theatrics that were put in place for these trials. So there were human beings in many ways being used as props to paint the veneer that they were somehow going through deep trials to make sure that we were all safe with these vaccines. And I know there was for instance, a 13-year-old girl. They in fact had an ad, the Vaccine Safety Council had put out an ad that was going to run during the Super Bowl. Then it was yanked by Comcast. They wouldn't allow it to air, which shows a perfectly healthy 13-year-old girl who went through this particular trial and then ended up having all sorts of adverse events. So these people were used as props, essentially, right?
Yes, exactly. And so the clinical trial subjects were deceived. But importantly, most of the clinical trial sites and investigators were also deceived, and most of the FDA employees were deceived, because this particular scam is driven from the top. Only few people, as far as I understand, at the top of these organizations, the Department of Defense, HHS, FDA, BARDA, their legal councils, they know. But then the rest of the regular employees and rank and file, and especially clinical trial subjects, of course, were kept in the dark. And in fact, under Obama administration Cures Act, amended, I believe, the emergency use authorization, or not emergency, the informed consent requirements, such that subjects don't have to be necessarily informed of what's going on if it's deemed not in their best interest. And so again, through, it's too long to go into the legal history. There's very extensive research, hundreds of pages of documents on legal history of this, but the laws that they're invoking to run this program do not require informed consent, and also do not require the clinical trials.
So the people,
and they're not under FDA.
I'm sorry, this is unbelievable. So the people involved in these trials, they don't need to be informed about what is happening?
Yes, exactly. So the informed consent rules have been amended under Obama to say that if it's not in the best interest of the subject, who decides if it is or it isn't? But that's what it says. So, these types of things can be concealed from people. That this actually under emergency use authorization used during public health emergency, this is very critical. That's why they keep extending public health emergency beyond any. We don't have any emergency, but they keep extending it. Why? Because they need this. Under public health emergency use authorized these kinds of medications, countermeasures. That's a key word. These are not vaccines; they're countermeasures. So all these three together, they can use it this way. They don't have to inform the subjects what it is. They can use a lot of secrecy. They don't have to run clinical trials. They're not required because these products cannot be investigational products. That's what the law says. If they cannot be investigational products, then we don't have any investigation. We don't have any clinical trial subjects. So that's how they're pulling this off.
So it's at the Pentagon. It's at the Department of Defense. You talked about countermeasures. And, of course, I think what we all think of immediately is foreign threat, right? That you're dealing with the Pentagon, right? It's supposed to protect us against foreign adversaries. So how is COVID a foreign adversary? And how is this being run through the Pentagon?
That's a great question. So from the very beginning, turns out that the Trump administration and subsequently Biden administration treated this COVID as war, as an act of war, because the National Security Council is setting COVID response policy, which is National Security Council doesn't have any health department representatives, only defense and intelligence. And so National Security Council sets policy for COVID. HHS is not setting policy. HHS is not lead agency in response of it. They are managing information. So the top of the government is treating it as an act of war. And they're telling all of us, oh, it's a health event. It's a naturally evolved virus, jumped from a bat. And don't even mention, lab creation, because you'll be canceled on social media immediately and censored, right? So right from the start, we have huge deception going on. What in fact they're treating as war, they're telling people it's health event.
And we learned from the Twitter files, Sasha, just this past week, the latest round of Twitter files, that the Biden administration was actively going after and trying to censor anybody who talked about lab leak theories and talked about Wuhan lab. And we're going after this idea that this came out of a lab. And so they were actively trying to censor that narrative. So this was all coordinated. And we know that multiple agencies were actively, of course, going after Twitter and social media companies and trying to keep this quiet. In these documents, does your research show, just how deeply does this go? And how widespread is the Pentagon's tentacles in this? Does it reach to Dr. Fauci? Does it reach to other main agencies?
Well, yes. So they're all in fact coordinating this. In fact, there is. They even set up in 2013. So by the way, the pre-planning goes years, at least 2012, 2013, based on the contracts and based on the documents that I have uncovered. So for example, there is Pandemic Enterprise. It's a quasi-private, quasi-government enterprise that's been set up in 2013 that involves 10 heads of federal agencies. It's called PEMC, that's the abbreviation. And so 10 heads of federal agencies, including Department of Defense, HHS, FDA, NIH, Department of Agriculture, Energy, Veterans Affairs. So all of them get together and secretly discuss these kinds of countermeasures, very secretly. So there is their memorandum of understanding pasted on FDA's website. And most of it, 90% of it, deals with how we're going to keep everything secret between each other, all the confidentiality disclosures, how we're going to communicate about this. So we have this cabal formed with a lot of secrecy and a lot of procedures to maintain secrecy about pandemic responses in 2013.
It's almost like they knew this was coming. I mean, this is where we talk about conspiracy theories on this show. I mean, it's all true. I mean, this is unbelievable. So there it is, all in 2013. It's all laid out.
It's laid out how they're going to keep everything secret, and I wonder why what's supposed to be a health event is so secret from the public. So how is this even, so then they're treating it as war, then again telling us it's health. So here we go. So they're covering up military activity with this representation of health event and a response to a health threat. So that's where people are not informed right away and being deceived. And then, because they've invoked these set of laws and they're using countermeasures, not even vaccines. So countermeasures are not pharmaceutical products. Countermeasures it's all different category.
So
FDA
to be clear, then it's not technically a vaccine, right? It's just a countermeasure.
Countermeasure, and specifically Department of Defense ordered them from private manufacturers as prototypes. So people were never told, oh, come over, get injected with countermeasure prototype. Were they?
No, and they weren't told that, right? Because as you pointed out, they were not on a need-to-know basis, right? So they didn't have to have informed consent. So here's a prototype we're going to inject you with, just like the 13-year-old girl we featured at the beginning here and talked about. Mm-hmm. Would her family have allowed that if they knew that this was just a prototype?
Absolutely not. No, people were told, oh, this is vaccine, this is safe and effective, it's been tested rigorously. By the way, no testing of safety have been done. They have not done any animal trials. They have not completed any animal trials, not even started them before they started mass injecting people in human trials. And that's a complete violation of all regulations everywhere in the world, including FDA. And again, nobody was told that. They said, oh, it's been tested, it's been in development, we've done preclinical trials, and they've done none. They just went straight into people and injecting this girl who is now paralyzed, as far as I understand.
We, the people, are dying in massive numbers. 6.5 million. 6.5 million globally. That's criminal charges. Did Anthony Fauci lie about gain of function work? Absolutely, in my opinion, he did. And how about criminal charges? We're gonna go after Bannon for contempt because he didn't bother to show up to a farce hearing. But we're gonna let Fauci lie to Congress about something that is consequential enough to result in 6 million deaths? Can anyone explain this to me? We, the people of the United States, should be outraged. Instead of pitting a war against people who are Christians, people who believe in the United States, people who want our country to succeed, maybe we should look at the people who are responsible for one of the greatest pandemics in human history and who have that's resulted in millions of deaths worldwide. I pray that every country in the world, every country, send it to the U.S., ask us, when are we going to investigate the crooks? The U.S. government didn't do this, but there were people in the U.S. government who did. There are criminals involved who I believe were responsible for this, who were negligent in their work. They did it. The Chinese Communist Party was involved in this. Anthony Fauci appears to be involved in this. Peter Daszak appears to be involved in this. Let's hold them accountable. It's time for criminal charges, criminal investigations. Jail, here we go.
Is this the same Peter Daszak they sent to investigate the Wuhan leak?
Yes, this is Peter Daszak, who was out there. We sent him to China to decide whether or not this was a lab leak or natural origin. Peter Daszak, whose company built this in the lab with the Chinese Communist Party in Wuhan, China, was sent to China to investigate himself.
We didn't know anything about this in December. We were starting to get rumblings. China said there was some sort of an outbreak on December 31st. But Dr. Barrick signs a government deal with Moderna. I want to read it exactly to you. This deal was made. It's confidential. It's 158 pages long. It is, if I skip to page 104, they are entering a specific private confidential agreement. The NIH appears to be transferring technology to Dr. Barrick, but what they're making clear is, quote, mRNA coronavirus vaccine candidates developed and jointly owned by NIAID and Moderna. Now, this is weird because it's 2 weeks later that we know there's a problem. They signed that deal 2 weeks before, and they signed it with the doctor who happened to be a partner with the bat lady in Wuhan. Here's where it gets really dark. These are the same group of people that in the end of January begin to have meetings and they shut down and begin to smear anyone who's looking into the lab leak theory. They establish that's not true, don't even look there. It appears to be collusion. We've passed this on to several people in Congress and the Senate. We know Rand Paul is on this, and Dr. Fauci has some answers to give.
There were 138 companies that were involved in manufacturing and distributing the vaccine. They're all military contractors. The Pentagon and the National Security Agency ran the entire pandemic response. Pfizer and Moderna don't really own those vaccines. They slapped their labels on them, but it was a Pentagon project.
Dear colleagues and supporters, we declare that Pfizer, Moderna, BioNTech, Janssen, and AstraZeneca, and their enablers, willfully withheld and omitted crucial safety and effectiveness information from patients and physicians and should be immediately indicted for fraud. We know that shortly after administration of these products, thousands of people have died, and although correlation isn't causation, reasonable criterion have been applied to examine the relationship between injections and the events, and is absolutely clear-cut that these are the cause of death. Mechanistically, the design of these products was knowingly deficient in a number of ways. First, they caused the expression in the human body of toxic virus spike protein. Unlike what they told us that it would stay in the injection site, they distribute widely around the body. There is no built-in limit to the amount of toxic spike protein that can be made or for how long it is made, and that's the cause of the toxicity. Turning to the clinical trials, there is evidence of questionable practices all around. For example, several of the studies were clearly unblinded while they were ongoing, contrary to best practice, and also in a number of cases subjects were removed from the database prior to statistical analysis in a way that is suggestive of fraud. We were given blanket assurances time and again by all of the companies about the benign safety profile of their products. Even as the products rolled out and in the earliest weeks, they must have known this was not true. To add insult to injury, it appears that these products provide little or no protection from the virus that they sought to protect us from. Finally, turning to the non-clinical studies, my area, the packages are hugely compromised by omissions of standard safety studies, which, regardless of regulatory requirements, should have been done because they do impact human safety. Specifically, so-called ADME tox, looking at distribution. It does leave the injection site, and they told us it didn't. They have not conducted complete reproductive toxicology, without which these should never be given to pregnant women. The consistency of the materials being tested in toxicity tests, and even not all the components have been through toxicity testing. And finally, they cannot claim lack of anticipatory knowledge, because the companies and the FDA knew that products of this type would produce many toxicities.
Here are the undeniable facts. There are 25 to 30 US-funded biolabs in Ukraine. According to the US government, these biolabs are conducting research on dangerous pathogens. Ukraine is in an active war zone with widespread bombing, artillery, and shelling, and these facilities, even in the best of circumstances, could easily be compromised and release these deadly pathogens. Now, like COVID, these pathogens know no borders. If they are inadvertently or purposely breached or compromised, they will quickly spread all throughout Europe, the United States, and the rest of the world, causing untold suffering and death. So in order to protect the American people, the people of Europe, the people around the world, these labs need to be shut down immediately, and the pathogens that they hold need to be destroyed. Instead of trying to cover this up, the Biden-Harris administration needs to work with Russia, Ukraine, NATO, the UN to immediately implement a ceasefire for all military action in the vicinity of these labs until they're secured and these pathogens are destroyed. Now, in addition to all this, the US funds around 300 biolabs around the world who are engaging in dangerous research, including gain of function, similar to the lab in Wuhan, where COVID-19 may have originated from. Now, after realizing how dangerous and vulnerable these labs are, they should have all been shut down 2 years ago, but they haven't. Now, this is not a partisan political issue. The administration and Congress need to act now for the health and well-being of every American and every person on this planet.
Was it possible that they stuck 3 separate HIV proteins in these shots and effectively gave the world vaccine-induced AIDS? If that happened, all the doctors will tell you that is so. So how is it possible that they've effectively killed half of the globe and they're still walking around free?
Did you know, Todd, the military is starting to test the members of the military for AIDS?
Yes, I do know that.
Are you
and sickle cell too, by the way, and sickle cell as well, because the vaccines have also the propensity to change the shape of red blood cells, and so now they're showing up with sickle cell, with HIV, with cancers that never existed before. It was only in 2021 that we found there was an 1,100% increase in all-cause morbidity and mortality. We don't know what those numbers are anymore because the DOD changed them and fudged them. And I was talking to one of our whistleblowers yesterday, funny enough, and I said, well, how can we track how many pilots are no longer flying because they can't? And this person effectively said, we can't, because now DMED is worthless. It's not useful because the numbers are all made up. We don't even know how to track this now.
Now that they're doing these blood tests and they're looking to see if members of the military who've been vaccinated have AIDS, vaccine-induced, vaccine-acquired immune deficiency, basically.
That's
Are
right.
they also looking to see if, in fact, some of the members of the military even took the vaccine? Because, let's face it, there's people out there that'll, for $100, $1,000, whatever, you can walk into a CVS and they'll take your vaccine, squirt it into the trash can, and fill out the form and say, well, they came in for their vaccine, I didn't have to tell you I put it in their arm, Are they going to be able to determine that?
And they can tell. Yeah, they can. So we did mass spectrometry on both Pfizer and Moderna, and we found that each of them contains something called luciferase.
Right.
And in one of them, it's SM102, and the other one is ALC3015 as key ingredients. Luciferase is a bioluminescent ingredient, for lack of a better word, that will, in fact, allow third-party onlookers to know whether or not you got the shot. And I've talked to people who showed up at the border with their fake vaccine cards and were turned away because the border inspectors knew they hadn't had the shots. They knew remotely. So the answer to your question is yes, they'll know whether people got the shots or not. And those who stood up and said, I'm not getting the shots, are already getting processed out. Right? That's what we're doing from day to day, is trying to help those people.
The Russians secured Pentagon-run biolabs in Ukraine. The U.S. Embassy was caught deleting proof of this from their website. And when the Russians shared documents showing the Ukrainian Minister of Health ordering employees of these biolabs to destroy all deadly pathogens, U.S. Senator Marco Rubio asked the U.S. State Department if there was any truth to this. Undersecretary Victoria Nuland not only confirmed the presence of the labs, but confirmed that they contain weaponized biological agents that they now fear the Russians will indiscriminately use to start a world war. The Pentagon calls them bio-research labs and containment labs, and claim their clandestine operation is all somehow in self-defense. But they are admittedly creating and storing weaponized biological material. And so these biolabs are in violation of Article 1 of the Prohibition on Biological Weapons. During the past couple years, citizens of the world have been getting an advanced education on bioweapons. And the very same crooks we see foisting the Great Reset medical tyranny are involved in the Ukrainian bioweapons labs. This is all being paid for with tax dollars through the Pentagon's Defense Threat Reduction Agency, the DTRA. U.S. company Black & Veatch has been working closely with the DTRA building bioweapons labs since 2003. Black & Veatch share an office in Kiev with Metabiota, who signed an $18.4 million contract with Black & Veatch in 2014. Metabiota got their start in 2015 with funding from Hunter Biden's Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners, who gave Metabiota $30 million to help protect the world from the spread of epidemics. This is the very same Rosemont Seneca that was mysteriously wired $3.5 million from the wife of the former mayor of Moscow. And the very same Metabiota partnered with Peter Daszak's EcoHealth Alliance, the group that Dr. Fauci used to funnel money to the Wuhan lab for gain-of-function research in 2014. In 2014, Metabiota, EcoHealth Alliance, and the Wuhan Institute of Virology were together researching infectious diseases deriving from Chinese bats. Metabiota is working with known CIA front In-Q-Tel. It is funded by the U.S. Department of Defense, the NIH, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Google, and the National Geographic Society. Metabiota's founder, Nathan Wolfe, sits on the board of EcoHealth Alliance and is a member of DARPA's Defense Science Research Council. In 2012, he wrote a book titled The Viral Storm: The Dawn of a New Pandemic Age, wherein he thanked his friends, pedophile Jeffrey Epstein and biotech venture capitalist Boris Nikolic. Boris Nikolic was named Jeffrey Epstein's successor executor upon his death. Wolf has also been seen hanging out with Ghislaine Maxwell on multiple occasions. He is also one of Klaus Schwab's young global leaders, trained on how to enact the Great Reset agenda being directed by the World Economic Forum. Russia claims the Pentagon has over 30 biolabs in the Ukraine alone. China claims they are operating 336 biolabs in 30 different countries. And now, members of our corrupt U.S. government are saying this is all a Russian conspiracy, and that we should soon expect a false flag attack from Russia.
If there's a biological or chemical weapon incident or attack inside of Ukraine, is there any doubt in your mind that 100% it would be the Russians that would be behind it?
There is no doubt in my mind, Senator, and it is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves.
And since we're discussing Pakistan, terrorism comes to mind. Terror comes in many forms, they say. Sometimes it's from the neighborhood, sometimes it's online, sometimes it's from those you entrust with saving lives. Vaccine makers, for example. While countries like India are sending free vaccines to poorer nations, there are companies like Pfizer which are bullying governments It's a story in contrast, and what a stark contrast this is. The US-based company Pfizer is holding governments to ransom, interfering with their legislation, even demanding military bases as guarantee. Would you believe it? A vaccine maker asking for a country's military base in return for vaccines. On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you 2 horror stories from Latin America and the bizarre demands that Pfizer is making. Let's start by looking at Pfizer's business in the region. It has vaccine deals with 9 Latin American countries: Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Mexico, Panama, Peru, and Uruguay. 2 major Latin American nations are missing from this list: Argentina and Brazil. Neither has a deal with Pfizer, but both have a story to tell. Let's start with Argentina. Talks between Argentina and Pfizer began in June 2020. In July, President Alberto Fernandez held a meeting with Pfizer's CEO in Argentina. Guess what followed? Pfizer asked to be compensated for the cost of any future lawsuits. What does that mean? Say someone files a civil lawsuit against Pfizer in Argentina, and if that person wins the case, who pays the compensation? It won't be Pfizer. It would be the government of Argentina. Now, Argentina had never done this before, but it made an exception. It needed life-saving vaccines, and desperate times call for desperate measures. So Argentina's parliament passed a new law in October 2020. But Pfizer was unhappy with its phrasing. The law said Pfizer needs to at least pay for negligence, for its own mistakes, if it happens to make any in future. Pfizer rejected this. It won't pay for its mistakes. Argentina then offered to amend the law to define negligence more clearly, to include only vaccine distribution and delivery under negligence. Pfizer was still not happy. It demanded the law be amended through a new decree. That's when Argentina put its foot down. They refused. Pfizer then asked Argentina to buy an international insurance. What for? To pay for potential future cases against the company. Argentina agreed. In December 2020, Pfizer came back with more demands. It wanted sovereign assets as collateral. What does that mean? Pfizer wanted Argentina to put, and listen to this, put its bank reserves, its military bases, and its embassy buildings at stake as collateral. Pfizer wanted Argentina to put its sovereignty at stake for what? Just to secure vaccines. There is no doubt that Pfizer is sitting on a pile of life-saving drugs. But what gives it the right to bully a government? Profiteering from your plight and mine. You see, vaccine manufacturers have always enjoyed a certain amount of liability waiver. Say you receive a vaccine from Pfizer, you have adverse effects because of the jab. You can always go ahead and file a lawsuit against the company. And if you win that lawsuit, instead of Pfizer, it will be the government that will be compensating you. And this is a normal practice. In the United States, for example, the PrEP Act, that's the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, gives total immunity to companies like Pfizer and Moderna. But this is only if something goes wrong unintentionally. This does not apply to negligence. Pfizer is not happy with that. It wants more, not just sovereign assets, but a fraud insurance. Argentina was not okay with this. What about Brazil? What did Pfizer do in Brazil? The world's 3rd most affected country. Pfizer went a step ahead and asked Brazil to create a guarantee fund and deposit money in a foreign bank account. On the 23rd of January 2021, Brazil's health ministry put out this statement, citing excerpts from Pfizer's pre-contract clauses. These are Pfizer's demands. Look at this. Number 1, Brazil waives the sovereignty of its assets abroad in favor of Pfizer. This is a vaccine company. Number 2, that the rules of the land be not applied on Pfizer. Number 3, that Brazil take into consideration a delay in delivery. Number 4, that Pfizer is not penalized for a delay in delivery. And number 5, in case of any side effects, Pfizer be exempted from all civil liability. The government of Brazil calls these clauses abusive. And they're right. It goes without saying, the Pfizer deal with Brazil failed too. This is a report by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. It talks about a third country one whose deal with Pfizer was reportedly pushed back by 3 months. Why? Because Pfizer made similar bizarre demands. The company has just 2 billion doses to deliver this year, and that is on a first-come, first-served basis. A delay of 3 months can cost a whole year, and it can cost a lot of lives. Pfizer is playing with life-saving drugs. It is abusing its position, and having developed a vaccine with the help of government funding, it is now throwing tantrums at governments. Did you know that Pfizer's German partner BioNTech was given $445 million by the government of Germany? The US paid Pfizer $2 billion as early as July 2020. This was against pre-orders. Pfizer is looking at making $15 billion from vaccine sales this year. It is in talks with 100 countries and organizations. There is no dearth of money for this company. Why then is Pfizer bent on squeezing desperate countries of their assets? Like we showed you, 9 Latin American and Caribbean countries struck deals with Pfizer for vaccines. What did they have to give up in exchange? Military bases? Embassy buildings? Sovereign funds? Look at Pfizer's hypocrisy. It is bullying poor countries behind closed doors. And in front of the press, it is playing Messiah. On the 22nd of January, Pfizer signed an agreement with COVAX, the Global Vaccine Alliance. It committed 40 million doses to poor countries this year. And the company put out a press release. You must listen to what they say. I want to read out a particular quote from Pfizer Chairman and CEO Albert Bourla. At Pfizer, he says, "We believe that every person deserves to be seen, heard, and cared for. And that's why, from the very beginning of our vaccine development program, Pfizer and BioNTech have been firmly committed to working towards equitable and affordable access of COVID-19 vaccines for people around the world." Does this make you angry too? It's time we call out such companies that are out to profiteer from the pandemic. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.
Friend, thank you for coming this far with me on our second episode in this second hour of the Fauci deception. In our next hour, we'll be looking at propaganda and some other things. I know that I've laid some heavy things at your feet. Because I was a paralegal studies major in college and I had a professor who made millions on medical device injury, I'm pretty seriously listening to what Sasha Latipova has to say about bad manufacturing practices. I'm also very concerned by attorney Todd Callender, as his entire plaintiff class is military. If you don't follow him, if you don't know anything about him, I suggest you learn about him and everyone else I introduced you to in the last hour. If you own a Bible, the book Revelation is the only book in the entire text that offers a specific blessing to the reader. I'd like to invite you to read that book if you never have. And if you really want to understand it, study the temple service, study the feasts, study the Day of Atonement. There are many things that Revelation says that are directing our attention to the Day of Atonement. For now, don't believe what I say. Test what I say. Go check this out. Use places like Rumble, like Telegram, like Odyssey, like BitChute. YouTube and Google are using algorithms to hide data, and they're blatantly using incredible censorship. Dig, because your life depends on it. Dig, because we may have to fight. Like we're the third monkey getting ready to board Noah's Ark, and brother, it's starting to rain. Repeatedly, the New Testament and the Tanakh itself tell us not to fear, not to fear. There's fear porn everywhere. That is misinformation, fear will fiddle with your immune system. So if you live in a place where you can go outside and take off your shoes and ground yourself and breathe some fresh air and some sunlight, don't do this if you live in Palestine, Ohio, please. And if you don't know what's going on in Palestine, find out. It's a natural disaster. No. Natural disaster? No, this is intentional, friend. Intentional. Our nation needs prayer, especially that region. So if you get on your knees, I'm going to ask that you get on your knees for them tonight. Messiah is coming soon, but first, great tribulation. Ready yourself. If there is no testimony, if there is no Torah within them, there is no light. And what Yeshua called Torah doesn't match with what the rabbis call Torah. Follow him. He's the rabbi. Have a great day, friend. See you in the next episode. Until then, study hard. Remember, Paul said to study to show yourself approved. He didn't say to pray to show yourself approved, or to tithe to show yourself approved, or to sizzle like bacon. He said to study. Come with me, friend. We're going to do some of that. Till then, watch your six.
There were cables from that actually WikiLeaks released, and a friend who's a great journalist, Branko Marcetic, who's been looking at the Ukraine conflict with a critical eye. He sorted through these cables, and he found all of these diplomatic cables from the prior era where you had NATO allies, you had U.S. officials who were all saying, hey guys, Russia has red lines here with regard to Ukraine. And floating NATO membership with Ukraine is a real violation of their hard red lines, and we're very fearful. And they laid out exactly the trajectory that we could find ourselves on. Now, that doesn't deny Russia agency or, Putin and the Kremlin agency for invading. No one made them do that. However, it is to say that, there was a time when you were allowed to acknowledge that U.S. policy could lead to this exact event. And now when you even suggest that us, floating NATO membership with Ukraine and saying that they were going to be made apart, that some of these things were exacerbating, they crossed the red line and, created a situation that was incredibly tense where this is the predictable outcome. Again, you're not allowed to talk about